Okay, some people are having trouble understanding variables, so here is a slideshow that I presented, and I'm just going to talk about what I have in the slideshow. So maybe if you're better listening than you are reading it yourself, then you'll have both modalities that you can use. So this is about variables in Java, and you need to think about a variable. If you break out the word, so variable, if you break it, so it has vary in the beginning, so vary or change, and able, so it means really able to vary or change. And so you should think of it as a bucket or a location where you store values that you're going to use later. So you might not know what the value is going to be, but you have to sort of decide what kind of a value you're going to store in your bucket, and you end up naming that place. And so it's a piece of memory in your computer program. And so you have to declare a variable, and when you declare a variable, you give it a meaningful name. So that's one of the standards that we're going to look for. So you have to make sure it's a meaningful name. So you can't call it random names like, yo or something like that. It needs to make sense so that if someone's looking at your code, if I looked at this and I said int hour, okay, so I know you're going to be putting a number in there. It's an integer and it has to do with the hour of the day. So I know exactly what that variable is going to do, and it helps me read your code. And that's the other thing, is you want your code to be readable by other people because programmers all work together. So declaring a variable sets the name and location of the variable. So now the other thing that you can do with variables is you can assign them values. And when you write an assignment statement, you set the value of your variable. So before we had this variable called hour, but we didn't have anything in it. And now to set it, you put the name of the variable, and you have it set it equal to, and then you put the value in it. Now because this is an integer, we just put numbers, and they're not in quotation marks. Strings need to be in quotation marks. The other syntax you need to have is you need to have the semicolon afterwards. So this is how you set the value of the variable. And I'm actually going to go back. So when it was declared, you have to say what type it is first. So int is a type, and string is a type. Int is, you have to have a lowercase letter for int, and we're going to get into different types later. And string has to be uppercase. Again, this is syntax. You have to follow this rule just like you have to always have a capital I. So you have the type, then you have a space, then you have the name that you give it, and then the semicolon. That's if you just declare. And when you're assigning a value to the variable, you put the name of the variable equals to, and then the value. So you can do it all in one. So you can initialize a variable, so you can declare and assign a value all at the same time. So this is very efficient. So when possible, you want to be efficient with your code. So this one, in the beginning, they know we want it to be an integer, we want the name to be hour, and we want it to be equal to 11. So all of that stuff happens at one time. So you set the name, location, and value all at once. So right now, we're going to know 3 types of variables. So there's 2 types that are numbers. There's an integer and there's a double. And integers are whole numbers. They can be negative or they can be positive, but there's no decimal value. Doubles are numbers with decimals. So fractions would be because they turn into a decimal, and they can also be negative or positive. So sometimes people call them these floating points because the decimal point will change in different ways. So those are called doubles, and integers are the other number type that we have. And then the other type we know is string, and that's a text. And strings have to appear between quotation marks. So if I say name equals, I have to put Mrs. Donahue in quotation marks. And you also need to know about different operators because you can do computations, right? So you can do addition, we know subtraction, we know multiplication, and we know division. So those are the symbols that you'd use, but you have to follow the order of operations when you do it. So you need to follow that PEMDAS that you probably learned a long time ago, and it's still very important. So the thing to keep in mind is multiplication and division are on the same level, and addition and subtraction are on the same level. So even though PEMDAS, it looks like it's all in a row. So parentheses, number 1. Then exponents are number 2. And then multiplication and division happen in the order in which they appear. So if the multiplication's first, that will happen first. And if the division's first, that will happen first. So sometimes, depending on your calculation, you might have to throw in some parentheses to get the actual value that you want. And then the same thing with addition and subtraction. So remember that you need to have meaningful names for your variables. And when you use a variable in your program, the first time you have to say what type it is. So you're going to say the type. If it's an integer, int. If it's a string, it's the word string with a capital letter. And then you can, at the same time, if you want, you can give it the value all at the same time if you want to, but you don't have to because you want to be very efficient with your code. Once it's declared, you just name the variable, you use that in your code without any quotation marks, because quotation marks means that it's a string. So I hope that this helped a little bit. If anyone has any additional questions, definitely send me a message, post something back to the group chat, and we can all add in maybe tips and tricks to make it more understandable.